In my world of reading, first lines, first sentences, first paragraphs really attract me. Let's see how it goes with this book that I have with me, Lost and Found, an A to Z of neglected writers of the Anglophone Caribbean, written and edited by Alison Donnell. Alison, welcome to the program Oral Tradition.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and Oral Tradition is an adventure in literature with a bias towards Guyanese literature. Yep. I said I'm attracted to opening lines, sentences. And there's some opening lines here that I like to touch on before we go on. For instance, I'm quoting from your preface, that's page 1. Taking classes with Guyanese academic transformed my understanding of the literary, not only expanding the breadth of my reading, but shifting my sense of what writing could be and what it could do. And next paragraph, it says, what I wanted to find a way to express then, and what has driven all my scholarship since, is this mismatch between what is curated, circulated, and critiqued. Your words.
That's right.
Let's start with what literature can do, or what writing could be, and what it could do. And then we'll get into the book.
Absolutely. So I guess,
yeah,
that was a class that I took at Warwick University with the most amazing literary scholar, Michael Gilts, also a very creative person as well. And I think, I'd always absolutely loved reading, but when I was going to university, I wasn't sure whether to be a doctor, a medical doctor, or to read literature. And I literally filled out the application form for both. And I think that I realised that where we live is kind of on the inside. And if I became a doctor, I'd be like a plumber of the body, and I wouldn't get to that inside. And for me, that's what literature does. It kind of rearranges our understanding of each other. It helps us to understand not only how other people think and feel, but why they think and feel in that way. Mm-hmm. What encounters, what relationships, what environments shape us as humans and connect us or disconnect us. And I guess that, growing up through an English classroom, I was very aware that I'd been given a very partial account of what it meant to live in the world. And I think that reading Caribbean literature just exploded that for me in the most powerful way.
Good for you.
Not a corrective. It was an expansion. It was like, wow, the experience of the Caribbean region was such a compression of an intensity of encounter, exchange, violence, but also, amazing kind of connections and rapports and relations and intimacies built across different groups and different people within those groups. And I think it just completely transformed how I read every situation, everything else I read since. And for me, it became a kind of, through literature, I had this other inner world that I could connect to.
Yeah. It's good when we have excellent teachers or mentors. Like as you mentioned,
Yeah, very important.
very important. I mean, those are the ones who are mentoring us. They can see our aptitude, where we head in, and perhaps lend a hand where we're going. Now, this mismatch, I'll come to the opening sentence just now. This mismatch between what is curated, circulated, and critiqued. Right? There's much more than that. And very often, we keep going back just to the popular writers, those who are already found, you know? So talk about this mismatch between what is collected.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was. I just explained how powerful it was to encounter the writers who are right at the heart of the tradition, who are the ones who are republished, who are the curated, the critiqued, the circulated.
Uh-huh.
So there's no sort of shade on those writers and writings. They were incredible. But one of the questions that really sort of niggled at me very early on was, well, where are the women here? So I think I was aware of Jean Rhys, and I was aware that she'd written her writings, most of them in the 30s, although they weren't published till later. And I became aware of Una Marson, the Jamaican writer, because she became the subject for my own doctoral thesis. But I just felt there was a whole missing generation of women writers, that all of the writers who I'd so enjoyed reading, like Lamming and Naipaul and Selvon and Harris, you know, their kind of companion women writers were missing. So a really big part of me for what was not there were those women writers.
There are many reasons contributing to these unseen women writers. Would you like to expand on some of those reasons?
Yes, I mean, I guess one of the sort of linking reasons, one of the kind of overarching reasons, I think, is because a lot of the women were writing for their communities. They weren't really writing for metropolitan publishers, and they weren't really writing either for the financial return of being the writer or the kind of professional recognition. So I don't think, not many of them really aspired to be a professional author. They had really incredibly busy. They were like multi-talented, multitasking, often teaching or journalists as well as writers. And so I think that the purpose for them of writing was very much about the writing rather than about their recognition as a writer. So they didn't go through those same sort of institutions and channels that I think that have kept people in print, certainly. And there's some different reasons. So a lot of these writers actually broadcast their work. So it fits in very well with the oral tradition because they told their stories, or their stories were told. Very many of them on the very famous Caribbean Voices radio program. But that meant that they weren't in print, and therefore they weren't circulated and anthologized and kind of put in photocopies for students in the same way as those works that came out with mainstream UK-based presses. But I think another reason was that sometimes, because of the nature of their careers, they didn't publish a whole collection of short stories. So if you look at someone like the Jamaican writer Gloria Escoffery, who's often known best as a visual artist, retrospectively, looking from the end of her life, she wrote a really considerable body of work, and it does all have a really shared thematics. There's a beautiful kind of thematics there around seeing and a visual appreciation and what it means to add value by representing something. But it's very hard to see that at the time, because her works were published often just in ones or two poems right across. So that scattering, was one of the reasons. I think, some of the other reasons is people had, as I said, very busy professional lives. So, the writer Monica Skeet in Barbados was really well-known, well-respected history teacher. And she did actually publish a collection of stories, but her pupils were completely unaware of that. So there's a lot of kind of humility around their own standing as writers. And it was really telling stories where Caribbean children could recognize themselves, that there was a motivation. My particular favourite, Edwina Melville, the Guyanese writer who was living in the Rupununi. Again, she was really writing to represent particularly Amerindian life and to really think about, I think that actually like how she could re-represent, the amazing kind of lived traditions, values, beliefs of a group of people that were often not fully or richly represented. So I think that they all had a kind of vocation around writing, but not the same kind of obsession about claiming the identity of the writer. That's not to say that there wasn't a lot of kind of active sort of diminishment of them, I think, as women. So if we go back to the Caribbean writing radio scripts, there's some really terrible, cringeworthy moments when a short story of someone like Eula Redhead, a Grenadian, a beautiful Grenadian short story writer, who had 11 stories broadcast on the BBC, and that was a lot by any of the writers' standards. But when her story is introduced, the commentator says, "Oh, this is a little hors d'oeuvre." So the notion that their writing wasn't kind of serious or literary, literary fiction in the same way, I think, did mean that they were diminished and they weren't taken as seriously, which is a great shame because their writings really, really hold up. When we go back to them now, they offer such a lot. But they slip from view, and it's really hard once somebody has slipped from view. We can see the efforts that scholars have made to bring back writers like Una Marson or Phyllis Shandolfree. It takes a huge effort, I think. So we're really kind of going against the grain to be able to see these writers again and really understand their value.
What I can't reconcile is that we often say that our women folk are the custodians of our stories. How come they haven't been able to burst onto the scene, meaning onto the printed page?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question, isn't it? Because in a sense, I think that kind of place, the kind of privilege that's given to women as being custodians of culture, is also to do with a kind of a constraint around them, living within a sort of domestic, intimate, not sort of contaminated by institutions or the kind of grubby world of commerce. So I wonder if there's a kind of irreconcilability there to the real value of their writing, that this wasn't seen, as really imaginative, as really crafted, as really being of equal value in every sense to male writing, but it was seen as being somehow passed on, inherited. So there is a moment actually when the amazing Jamaican poet Louise Bennett reads a story on the Caribbean Voices programme, and the commentator says, it's not really her story. It comes down through the oral tradition. So this kind of sense, I think, of being this custodian is also a way of saying it's not really yours. You're not really the artist. And I think as well, it's to do with this idea that that's something that's insider or a kind of domestic kind of knowledge that's passed on, but not commercialized. But, many of these women did have very serious ambitions. I mean, Edwina certainly wanted to break through in the literary world, she says in her letters, to write her magnus opus. And my goodness, she had one in her. She had a magnificent, absolutely incredible life. And we know that some of the other writers wrote to publishers and asked to be considered. So I think there are whole kinds of assumptions that were driving both ideas of what the literary looked like at this time and what the writer looked like, and that it was much harder for women to correspond with either of those.